Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I think we can do better than that. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Wonderful. I'm Jennifer Ablan, Editor-in-Chief of Pensions and Investments, and with me today are four heavyweights in our institutional investing industry. We have Thasunda Duckett, President and CEO of TIAA, John Carter, President and COO of Nationwide Financial, Will Fuller, President and CEO of Transamerica, and Penny Pennington, Managing Partner of Edward Jones. Welcome.
Thank you.
We know that 2024 represents the apex of baby boomers reaching age 65, so there is an urgent need for bold leadership, innovation, and action to advance lifetime financial security. One glaring statistic: the majority of the 30.4 million baby boomers expected to retire over the next 6 years are not financially prepared for retirement. So let's start off with this broad question. What are you folks most concerned about? Let's start with Thasunda.
Great. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here with such a powerful panel, having a real conversation on something that I think is a crisis. Myself and my colleagues at TIAA are very passionate and committed to our mission in ensuring that millions more Americans can have access to a secure retirement and a paycheck that they cannot outlive. And so when I think about this crisis, why do I feel this way? Well, first, 40% of all Americans run out of money in retirement. As you mentioned, today, 11,000 Americans over the age of 65 are retiring with the backdrop of a $4 trillion retirement savings gap. We also know that women retire with 30% less. 54% of African Americans do not have enough to retire. And this stat, 41% of young people between the ages of 25 and 35 are not contributing to their retirement plan. And so what can we do? I would break this up into three areas. First, there's an access gap. We know that 57 million Americans do not have access to an employer-sponsored plan. That means we need to work together with good policy to make sure that there is an easier way for employers, particularly small business, to provide retirement options for their employees. Secondly, there's a savings gap. We know that we need to do more to help people get started earlier in accessing their workplace plan. And when you think about what we can do, it starts with auto-enrollment and auto-escalation. We know that when people are auto-enrolled, that stat in terms of enrollment can go from 60% to 90%. So we can do more and we can do better working together. And then lastly, there's a guarantee gap. We know that in 1975, over 70% of Americans had access to a defined benefit plan. That number now is 12%. And so how do we ensure that millions more Americans can have the closest thing to a defined benefit without the stress of the balance sheet that companies face? And we believe that that opportunity is through an in-plan guaranteed solution. So when I think about access gap, savings gap, and guarantee gap, I think the operative word is it has to be easier in order to address this crisis, and it will take all of us. Good public policy, the private sector working together, and of course doing more to engage individuals about their retirement outcomes.
I know, John, you've talked about public-private partnerships. Why don't you speak to that?
Yeah, I will, and I appreciate all of those comments. And if we think about like what is alarming, I also think is there an opportunity there, and I think there is for our industry. So for example, we have pretty much conditioned investors to just focus on asset accumulation. It's like every month, you know, we look at our 401ks sometimes multiple times a day, and you think, okay, you know, I'm focused on the asset, which is fine, but there's a mind shift that needs to change in this country for those that have prepared or have worked towards a dignified and an independent retirement. We know that people who had access to pension plans are more confident in their retirement. So as an industry, and if you think of in-plan guarantee opportunities, can we create pension-like income streams for those of us that may not have pensions, with all of the products and the solutions that are out there, bring back that confidence that individuals have. And I do believe that there's an opportunity for those individuals to have a successful retirement, but we're going to really need to come together in a collaborative way. You know, less than 40% of retirees or pre-retirees get advice from financial professionals. And that's something that we do know. If you have access to pension-like income streams and you're working with financial professionals, you're going to have a much better chance of achieving your retirement goals, but you probably are going to have a lot less anxiety as well in your plans. And so this mind shift towards from accumulation to income, guaranteed income, and it doesn't just come from your 401k or 457. There's lots of other ways we can pull that together, is what we're focused on with Nationwide and with a lot of our education and thought leadership programs.
Penny, what are you most concerned about?
Yeah, well, I'll use those two great sets of comments as a jumping off point and come at it from the perspective of 19,000 financial advisors all over North America who are working with families, working with 4 generations of families at this point. We have 500,000 personal engagements with our clients every single week. We call ourselves North America's Advisor. I think it's an appropriate name. So what we see and what I'm concerned about is, John, just as you said, people are more confident if they're getting good advice. If they're getting advice that's tailored to them, utilizing great products and plans like their employer-sponsored retirement plan, that's key. But the advice needs to be personalized. And so much of our industry is really focusing on a particular subset of the market, and in fact, a smaller and smaller subset of the market. When the middle class in America and those who are aspiring to be middle class in America are really feeling the stress. It breaks my heart when I talk to clients or prospective clients and they say, I didn't know that I could get somebody like with a designation, maybe a CFP, maybe, you know, so folks who are super well trained offer this kind of advice in a hyper-personalized way. And North Americans, that's the place that we operate, don't realize that that's available to them. Our industry right now is 50,000 financial advisors short for the amount of advice that's needed in North America. 50,000 advisors short. Our industry has been shrinking. Interesting, Edward Jones accounts for 108% of the growth of number of trained financial advisors in the industry. Wait, more than 100%? Yeah, that's right, because everybody else is shrinking and we're growing our number of financial advisors. The desire for advice is up 60% since 2018 for all kinds of reasons that we could acknowledge, including the baby boomers aging and going into retirement. But so much more than that. There's an $84 trillion wealth transfer in motion right now. The 2 generations of wealth owners are passing it on to the next 2 generations who have very different views and motivations and expectations for their careers, for what they want to buy, how they want to live their lives, and how they're going to accept that wealth transfer as well as the transfer of the legacy and values of the people who own those assets today. So there's just a lot in motion in our industry and a responsibility that our industry has to lean into the amount of advice that's needed out there.
Will, what concerns you the most?
I'm just picking up with the conversation here is, I'm sitting here reflecting and thinking about a statistic that I saw last week. 4 out of 10 Americans, families, don't have sufficient savings for a $400 emergency. A $400 emergency. It's 40% of our citizens, our population, forget about being prepared for retirement. They're not prepared for a flat tire, for a hot water heater that needs replaced. And so all these solutions come together because it really starts with savings. It just starts with having access to affordable savings. And we have, I'm just going to reiterate, major access gaps here. We have something like 30% of all workers, if you're working, 30% of our workers do not have access to a retirement plan. And that's growing because the gig economy is growing. If you work for a small business, which is the largest private employer, 50%. And if you actually double click on a Google Maps and get into rural America, most of the employers are small businesses or businesses with less than 100 employees. So I'm thrilled for this panel because I know each of these companies that are represented here, our missions are all about how do we solve the access and the advice to Main Street American families, which are relatively underserved because the financial services industry has concentrated its focus in solving for savings and investments in the high net worth space, which is 1, 2, 3% of our people. So I think that what keeps me awake at night is we need a solution for the population. Yeah. And we need a solution also for our children. And that starts with education and financial literacy. My youngest daughter's out of college working. Her best friend comes in and says, Mr. Fuller, you're not going to believe my new company. They're making me run a 401k. They've auto-enrolled me to run a 401k. I said, Caroline, they don't want you to run a 401k. They want you to save for retirement. So she thought it was like a group activity. So financial literacy, education needs to start quite a bit earlier.
Yeah. Now, you brought up the gig economy and the lack of access. Here's a striking statistic. More than 57 million people working in the U.S. do not have access to a workplace retirement plan. Contractors, gig workers, what do you see as opportunities for helping these workers? Will?
Well, the federal government has had a solution here for many years, which is if you are a private company and you're working on a federal contract, you're required to have retirement savings set aside for you in that scenario. So I think if you just start with the public-private partnership theme and draw it forward, Maryland has done something pretty interesting with a state-sponsored plan. They basically are saying in Maryland, if you work for an employer, the employer either has to have you in the plan or have you enrolled in the state program. So there's no more option of no plan. And both of those have, in it with an auto-enrollment. And I think that's a really important point. People are so busy. They don't not want to start a retirement plan. When you start a job, you've just got so much stuff to do. You've got new devices, you've got new colleagues, you've got new policies you have to sign, and they just get busy. So what the all-enrollment does is it solves that problem. And if people don't want to participate, they can negative consent themselves out. But I think Maryland's doing something pretty interesting by saying either or, and I'm hopeful that that prompts more employers to realize offering a retirement plan is really kind of the base relationship you have with your employees, and I'm hopeful that the government will cut a lot of the red tape and cut the costs that keep small businesses who don't have big HR departments. They don't have HR departments that can absorb the administrative burden and the cost burden that some of the regulations require them to have.
Thasunda, you brought up lack of access. What do you see as opportunities for helping these workers?
Well, I think Will, really framed it right in terms of the opportunity. I think, knowing that we're not going to solve this retirement crisis without solving the small business issue. And so I think Maryland was a great example. I think currently there's 19 states. And so being able to have more states have the same model, I think will go a long way. And I do think we have to make it easy for small businesses. So within their payroll system, how can you make sure that their employees can have access to contributing to an IRA or other solutions, I think is absolutely important. And I do think we have to make it simpler. We cannot put the burden on small businesses, as Will said, with the administrative burden, with other red tape. It has to be simple, it has to be easy. And then I do think being able to bring that advice, many of them are people of color, many of them may be immigrants to this country, they may not be familiar, and so it's going to take access, I think it's going to continue to take a public-private partnership, and ease has to be the core of any solution, particularly when you're thinking about small businesses, when you're thinking about addressing the issue, particularly in rural America and all parts of our society. And so I would just echo Will's comment and think we need to do more in a public-private way.
Yeah. Jennifer, can I just throw in a
Absolutely.
comment about something that all of our companies have been in support of, is the strengthening of our retirement security system that operates today. Secure 2.0 that was implemented and now is going into implementation today had tax credits available to small businesses as they were beginning these programs. We work with almost 1 million, 750,000 business owners, and they tell us, Will, just as you were saying, gosh, there's so much to think about as a new employee. There's so much to think about as a small business owner. And entrepreneurialism has fired growth and innovation in our country. So if we combine entrepreneurialism and the growth of new and smaller businesses with the desire that that business owner really has to attract great talent, and part of that is in the benefits. Part of that comes from having a great retirement plan. It needs to be easier to do that. It needs to be cheaper to do that. And so Secure 2.0 really helps some with that process. There are another couple of provisions that we're very excited about and we're advocating for right now, because another thing that happens with any employee, and maybe especially those in smaller businesses, is they're balancing taking care of children and older adults, taking care of healthcare needs of their family, with trying to get to work. And so if you've got someone who is having to come out of the workforce periodically for caregiving needs, they take themselves off the rolls of their employer retirement plan. So these provisions would enable workers who do have to come away from their employer to continue to be able to invest in their own retirement savings.
Now, America is at a crossroads due to our aging population and increase in longevity, with this year being peak 65, the year that the most baby boomers turn age 65. What are some of the steps your firms have taken for your clients to address their needs against the backdrop of inflation? And I'm going to throw this question to you, John.
Yeah, I think first is that, I've been in the industry close to 40 years. And what I see from an industry standpoint, in some way, all four of our firms collaborate, partner, or cooperate and innovate together, and separately as well. I think that level of creativity and innovation is one of the things that's going to move us through the crisis, because not one firm is going to have all of the good ideas. So, when you think of that, the innovation and partnership across firms that typically were competitors and now they're business partners, I think that's a real win from that standpoint. The second is, I think of the collaboration that happens internally. At Nationwide, I have a leadership team, president of a retirement business, a life insurance business, an annuity business, that all sit at the same table. And if they can collaborate, they can innovate and come up with some very creative solutions, like our retirement plan business and our annuity business collaborated to provide in-plan suite of products that not only are available on the Nationwide platform, but we're partnering with great record keepers like Transamerica, Empower, Fidelity, et cetera, to bring this type of innovation. Because frankly, there are things that Edward Jones can do that Nationwide can't, that TIAA can, that Transamerica may or may not be able to do. That being said, if we can come together as an industry, which is happening, we can innovate and we can solve some of those problems. But it's going to take a lot more of that type of open dialogue and venture ideas. But I'm encouraged, because when you start to have billions of dollars, and you all have had a lot of success on the in-plan guarantee, there's something happening, and innovation and creativity and partnerships are what, at an industry level, are what are getting us through that. So, those are two examples that I would share.
Will, any thoughts from you?
What's going through my mind right now is how how someone feels when they're transitioning from working their whole life, focused on saving. Do we have sufficient savings? Now I retire, I've left the workforce. My paycheck's not coming, but the household doesn't change. The mortgages are still coming, the utilities are still coming, you still have your kids, you've got grandkids, you may have aging parents. And that's a moment of fear. It's a moment of fear. I've seen it myself with my parents. We've done all the right things. They called me one weekend, and they're like, "Will, we're scared." Well, they had nothing to be scared about. They just needed someone to sit there and show them, this is how you transition from working for your money working for you, and getting that guaranteed paycheck for life. And so it's almost not even questioned that the profession of advice is a solution. And yet the profession of advice has many different faces and many different business models, because we have a very broad and diverse country. A business model that works in the ultra high net worth private bank does not come down market to work in the middle income market, and vice versa. So I would like us to embrace all business models that are in the profession of advice, create more incentive for those that want to choose a terrific career, to be a coach, a mentor, an educator in your community, helping people in your community and helping their families. And I think technology can accelerate that, because technology can make things much more affordable to deliver to more people. So I would say the profession of advice, and growing the profession of advice and creating incentives for that to happen would be important.
Thasunda, your thoughts on Peak 75. What are some of the steps your firm has taken to address their needs against inflationary pressures?
Yeah, I mean, what's great about what the panelists have said, I think, is consistent to how we think about it at TIAA. I mean, if I posed a question to everyone and just said, who's your one? I know that all of us can name someone personally that we are helping to ensure can have a secure retirement. You know, I know when I think about my one, you know, I think about my father, Otis Brown, which I talk a lot about, and I think about the fact that he worked for a company for over 30 plus years, had access to a 401k, and never contributed $1. And this was a man who was in the mailroom. This was the man who scanned boxes and drove trucks. This is a man who did everything for his family financially, even when it was not always sufficient. And it wasn't until the daughter, myself, graduated from college, and I was looking at my dad's plan, and I saw that he had a pension. But when the daughter has to tell a very prideful man that, Daddy, this is not enough. And at the time, I was making $26,000, so I was not in a position to say, Dad, I have you. But to your point, he immediately then, for the last decade of working, maxed out. But the bills were all the same, and I don't know how he did it, but he did it because the daughter said, Daddy, this is not enough. And so when we talk about what we need to do, this is real. This is everyday America. And so what are the things that I think we need to do? Clearly at the heart of this is advice. And as you all said, it cannot just be for those that are wealthy. It has to be for everyone. It has to be consumable in a way. Money is emotional. How do we lower the anxiety and increase the confidence? And it absolutely takes partnership, as you mentioned. It takes us all working together, the private sector, the public sector, to make it easy to access advice, to make it easier to make sure that you can have an end plan, which many times is your source, in a way that can give you confidence. And so for us at TIAA, it is about partnership. It's about working with companies to say, how can we make sure that our solutions can travel on platform and off platform? It's about providing advice, where many of our wealth advisors are educating college professors, the people who are cleaning the grounds in higher ed, and making sure that they can have a plan that they can feel great about. And it's about making sure that we're giving them the tools to be able to access it in an easier, simpler way. And then lastly, I would say, we talk about Peak 65, but we cannot forget, yes, there's $84 trillion of money in motion, but it is uneven. We have to acknowledge that millions of Americans are not transferring wealth, they're transferring debt. And so how do we ensure that we can course correct and really engage our young people, knowing that they are incredibly stressed if you think about it, they did not experience the 20 years of this bull market. They don't know what it's like to have parents that have a defined benefit plan. They are stressed out in the geopolitical environment, higher interest rates, inflation, et cetera. And so our ability to give them confidence that they can start to save in an easy, simple way and have confidence that doing these basic things, not running a 401k, but contributing to their 401k or 403b plan can give them certainty and can give them protection against inflation, can give them the power of the tax benefit, but also give them the power of compounding at a much earlier age so that we can course correct what's currently happening in our country.
And I think, Penny, you're very big on financial literacy education.
Yes.
Why don't you talk about your work there?
You bet. So, Thasunda, you're exactly right. I mean, this is about young people now recognizing the magic of compounding, right? I mean, so many of us in this room have experienced that and know about it almost innately. Like, wait, you don't know that putting a little bit away early in your life really adds up to something extraordinary, especially if you're investing in businesses that are growing and innovating themselves. So we initiated a program 4 years ago with a goal to educate 1 million young people about the basics of financial literacy. We use the EverFi platform, and we use our hyperlocality as Edward Jones. We're everywhere. We know the school administrators and the PTA heads there, and we say, listen, we've got these programs, we've got these tools, digital and in person, that we can bring into your schools. We can have financial advisors interface, we can train the teachers, and this gets the basic tenets of investing in financial literacy in the hands of young people much more quickly. We know that their confidence increases, their understanding of the basics increases, their confidence increases, and the other thing that we know is that their parents get involved.
Yes, right.
And like with all of us as parents looking over a child's homework, what are you doing there? And the child often goes home and begins to teach some of these concepts to the parents who are in need of them as much as the child. So this is multi-generational. There are a couple of dozen states in the United States that require financial literacy and education in the high school curriculum. The thing is that it's an unfunded mandate. They don't pay for it. And so that's where we feel privileged to have come in and be able to offer these tools that do have sitting side by side human advice that's trusted in that community. And I think this is also a place where our businesses, we're all in agreement in this. Our businesses are all investing in financial literacy. It's going to take all of us to cover the waterfront and cover the need, but we're all in on that.
Excellent. John, your thoughts on financial
Yeah,
literacy?
it's interesting. I have 3 adult children. Well, they're not children, they're adults now. But one is in the private sector, one works for a nonprofit, and one is a public servant, a paramedic. And all of them, and to your point, you can imagine who was looking over their shoulders. You better enroll, whatever they have for you, enroll and start. But here's what's interesting, is I think if you can get to the saver early enough, they all are leveraging the programs and plans. And I see what happens is, maybe at first to the point it's like, well, wait, I want to spend money. I don't want to save it. But once that starts to add up to something happens. They become more motivated,
Right.
much more motivated to keep saving. I mean, when my daughter called me and said, I opened a Roth IRA, I just about fell out of my chair because, do you know what that is? But the point is we have 50 years of experience at Nationwide working with public workers and very successful savers that are in retirement now, and they enjoy that because we were part of their supplemental deferred comp savings. And here's what they did, and what I see my son as a paramedic do that's very successful is they started early, and they had someone that could be the captain at the fire station to say, you need to do this today. This is when you're filling out all the paperwork. Do it today. And I think another thing that we need to kind of break the cycle on with younger savers is everything's not linear.
Right.
If you need to pay off your student loan, but maybe not immediately, You need to save for a down payment on a house, but do you put off your retirement, or do you start to say, I'm going to save for my down payment, and instead of at 24 months, maybe it's 36 months, and I give this 401k a start. And I do think we have to do a much better job of saying there's parallel paths that you can take towards your journey of being independent in retirement. But I think the linear will end up putting retirement always last, and then they will not have the time invested that is such a value for young savers. And so, to Will's point, you got to make it easy and early, and you got to get them into it. But I see every day people that would not be thought of as rich Americans, but they're the hardest working Americans in our cities, counties, and states that are retiring independently with what they need. So let's learn from them.
That's right.
I mean, let's learn from them, because, I'm 61. I have brothers and sisters. I'm one of 8, from 55 to 71. Parents live to be 90. So, maybe 100 should be my plan. But,
Absolutely.
But this longevity, is real. And the sooner that we can start for all of us, and not just for younger workers, because, we have to plan to live, obviously, beyond what maybe our parents did. Time, not timing. It is one of the things that I think is an advantage for all young workers. And there's so many ways that they can participate. We just have to get them into those programs.
Will?
Yeah, we start this about education, and we're talking about savings, but let's not forget, sometimes we need to educate our children to be smarter about the credit and the debt they take on. Think of the major decisions children are making at a young age, not really thinking through the consequences of the magnitude of student loans. And the marketing on the debt side is incredible, right? Marketing is incredible. How many new credit card offers do we need to get, or the Venmo machine? So we need to up our game on the savings side, because we're getting, out marketed on the debt and the credit side. But by the time you find a consumer, we have to teach them how to get out of debt first. That's one thing. There's no free lunch. We have to help people even if they have debt. And I think one way that we're doing that is in our 401k plans, we allow the employer to link an emergency savings fund, a health savings account, and the 401k together. So you're funding the emergency savings first. The employers can even match that. You're funding the health savings account, and then you're funding the retirement account, as a way to, get really good, really good fundamentals. And in our agent force, we have 75,000 agents that serve the middle income market exclusively, and they're serving really some of the more underrepresented segments of the market. Of the 75,000, 65% are people of color, 55% female, and they speak 25 languages represented by the group. So they're really embedded in communities. They're doing in-person financial literacy training. And I've heard the mantra more than once: we don't care how much debt you have, how much savings you have, we just simply want to educate our community. So I think there's, again, I think you said it earlier, there's no silver bullet, there's no easy solution, but we all play a role.
Along with these great comments, I will just bust a myth. This myth that the younger generations who are so digitally enabled don't want to talk to a human being to get advice. It's just not true. We've just finished some research, and every age group, when given the opportunity to talk to a human, to find out they could talk to a human being, a trained financial advisor, to help them make decisions, they all said, yeah, I want that first, rather than opening an account online. It's a matter of our industry being there for them and letting them know that they can get that kind of advice.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, I'm going to come back to you because your concentration is on the middle market. Let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Go on.
So why? This is the middle market, represents consumers who have annual incomes between $50,000 and $200,000. So it would sit below what many would refer to as the mass affluent. It's the backbone of the U.S. economy in terms of the largest group of consumers. Relatively underserved. If you look from the financial services industry. And my view on why it's underserved is that the high net worth market, the business model that's effective in the high net worth, just does not travel down effectively for a whole host of reasons. Number one, the underlying cost of the model. Number two, the geographic dispersion of the American populace. When I was growing up as a kid in North Carolina, you had a Merrill Lynch office in Charlotte, you had a Merrill Lynch office in Raleigh. But if it wasn't for Edward Jones, no one was in those small towns, right? And there's something to know about, to be able to serve these communities, you have to be in the community. And I think that's what Penny's company does nationwide, of course.
Right back at you.
You can't go to a university or college in America and not find TIAA and Transamerica. We're exactly in the same game.
Penny, I want to talk to you about retirement inequality. Black and Hispanic Americans have less than half the retirement savings of white Americans on balance, and they are the least among racial and ethnic groups to have a retirement account. Why are we seeing such a profound racial ethnicity retirement gap?
Well, that's a deep and thorny question, isn't it? It sits right alongside why health outcomes are so disparate in our nation, across the world, but in our nation that we're talking about today. Health and wealth are two sides of the same coin, and there have been structural gaps in the access that people have to wealth and health outcomes that I think you're hearing everyone on this panel talking about leaning into. From a real place of vulnerability, I'll tell you a story about being in St. Louis, talking with a professional who lives in the city of St. Louis, who's a journalist, and we were talking about the work that we're doing to really learn in the community, from the community, about where they haven't seen us show up. You may have heard that phrase, not about me, without me. And this is the guiding light of a lot of work that we're doing around collaborating community by community to understand the wealth gaps that are there. And she said, Penny, I know who you are and I know who Edward Jones is. And if I go out to the suburbs, I see your signs everywhere. I just didn't know you were for me. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, she would be such a great client. This is exactly the kind of person that we work with. But she didn't see that from us. And so one of the things that we're really leaning into is collaborating. And the ways that you're hearing this panel talk about, collaborating with NGOs, with academics, with not-for-profit organizations, with debt counseling, with scholarship aids, with a number of different surrounding mechanisms for families to grow their wealth and health outcomes more predictably. Also, very importantly, we have agreed to use the same data set that goes all the way down to the street level. So as a cohort, as a collaborative cohort, we know if the strategies that we're working with our communities to adopt are working or not. And we can see that in a time period more quickly than a decade. We're working on a baby bonds program with the mayor's office in Atlanta. We're working on a guaranteed basic income program in St. Louis. And then sitting next to those programs are advice and guidance about all of these other structural things that face the families in our communities, where they're telling us what their needs are.
Thasunda, your thoughts on retirement inequality?
Yeah, I mean, retirement inequality is at the core of who we are at TIAA, and it goes back over 100 years when Andrew Carnegie, who founded us, saw that, the educators that were educating the world's most brilliant minds were retiring in poverty and not with dignity. And so this inequality goes back. And when we think about particularly in people of color and women, as Penny said, it is structural. So any stat that is health or money related, there's disparities. And we have to operate with intentionality in order to do our part as partners, public, private, and individuals, in order to change the tide. And so when I think about what we can do, it's acknowledging that this goes way back, because you have to acknowledge it, because if not, we'll put the burden on the individual as if it's their fault only. And so I love Penny's example and being proximate and being opening to listening to say, what can we do better to make sure that when you look up, you can see our brands and know that it is for you. When we look at women, for example, we know that there is a pay gap. We know that women make 83 cents on the dollar. And when you look at that differential, it's no wonder we're retiring with 30% less. But here is the opportunity. As we work to achieve pay equity, if that 83% was just at par, that's $1.6 million more for women to have at retirement. And so when I think about what we're all doing, I think it is about partnering. It's about activating our employees who want to go out and educate and be a part of their community. It's about making sure that our information is not talking at you, but meeting you where you are without judgment. It's about ensuring that it's easy and that it's accessible, whether it's our local locations, whether it's technology, or whether it's just easier to get on a path. And so when I think about how do we solve this retirement gap, I think it's about us getting proximate. I think it's about us disaggregating the data and not lumping it all together to talk about how good we are. But when you disaggregate the data, you can find the opportunity by the zip code or by the cohort. And it is about, especially when we think about our workers, making sure that our plans, our education, all of the tools we have are reaching those furthest removed from us. Again, who's your one? It's thinking about, is it reaching the man in the mailroom? Is it reaching the person that's scanning the boxes? Are they opting into a plan to make it easier? Are we giving them information in sound bites because they are busy in real easy consumable ways with confidence in order to get on a path? And so I am encouraged. I think it's a fight. I think we have to fight to ensure that millions of more Americans can have access to a dignified retirement, but also savings. And the last thing that I would say is that as we look at the structural issues, as we understand the differences between people of color and women, this is an American issue. And so as I think about all the work that we're doing collectively, this powers GDP. Mm-hmm. This ensures that we can have more opportunities so that everyone can benefit. And so it's a contact sport. It's one that we all have to be committed to, and we have to be consistent. I think the worst thing that we can do is be inconsistent and make it a moment or an initiative that we go in for a little bit and then we go back out and then we go back in. We have to demonstrate that we're not going anywhere. And we're committed to ensuring that you have access to a great savings plan, a great income plan, and confidence that you can provide for your family. And so retire inequality, economic inequality is at the core of who we are at TIAA and at the core of what all of you are working on. And I'm excited about the ways in which we can work together to really solve what I think is an American issue.
I agree. And if I could add just briefly, I think it's hard to argue all of the things we've just talked about. It's the right thing to do. But what's the sense of urgency as an industry? The financial and the retirement industry is a results-oriented industry. It pays for performance. That's maybe why many of us got into this to begin with. But here's what's the urgency for the industry, which is when we can reach that person that you talked to, Penny, the way they need to be communicated and connected with. And it may be Black, it may be Hispanic, it may be rural, areas where I grew up. If we can reach those communities and those segments, here's what happens. It's the right thing to do, as we just mentioned, but we reach a whole new segment in the business. We bring people into the industry that come from those communities. They have ideas and ways that they can reach so we can be more effective. And then guess what happens? This industry that has given us so much grows and provides those opportunities for others that may be very different looking than me when I got into this business 40 years ago. So yes, there's an urgency to help the individual and to reach them, as Thasunda said. But as a industry, it's our growth.
That's right.
And if you pick this industry to be in, results are what gets rewarded. So this is where we're all going to find growth across all of our businesses. And to me, that's an opportunity that there is urgency behind, and it is an American issue, but it's also an American opportunity that I think is exciting, but it's going to be testing, because these are complex things that we've all talked about this morning.
John, you also talked about personal accountability.
Yes. And I see that. I mean, I see that in our relationship with the firefighters and the paramedics. You know, it's you take care of yourself so you can take care of others. And the accountability is one thing I do worry about with younger savers, which is waiting for something to happen to take care of. Listen, we still live where we need to take care of ourselves in so many ways. When I look at, I mean, we're a Fortune 100 company. We're almost 100 years old. We have amazing benefits. And we have tons of resources and education programs for our workers in preparing for and then living in retirement. But they're underutilized. People don't use the tools that are there. So, okay, as an industry, how do we, whiteboard and come back so that we can reach, my gosh, the workers that work in our companies? I mean, and like to your point, people that your father didn't have the match, didn't contribute. Who came in and said we can do better? I was in a session yesterday that talked about one of the greatest assets to American companies' balance sheets isn't on their balance sheet. It's the talent that they have in their organizations. And what we're talking about today is what keeps people at fine companies represented here and certainly in the room. So we better figure it out, because that's a asset for our companies, that the more that we can surround with education, simplicity, multiple solutions, because that's another thing that's happened. There's so many ways that you can grow tax deferred now that your father didn't have and those in the 70s didn't have. But now we need that financial professional to come in and get us started and get us going in parallel type paths towards savings, towards retirement, towards debt consolidation and management, et cetera. But we have all the tools to do that. So how do we get the action taken? And I think that's a challenge for all of us, but it's an urgency that's an opportunity too.
And just to build on that, when I think about the accountability, it truly is all of us. It's how do we make sure that our legislators are continuing to build on that Secure Act and continue to make it easier. So for example, when I think about the Secure Act that Penny talked about, being able to understand that auto enrollment and auto escalation will be for new plans. But what about the existing plans? Again, who's your one? What about the opportunity for someone who's working hard today, did not contribute, but a way that we can help them opt in? Studies show that when you opt someone in, they do reserve the opportunity to opt out. But when you then opt them back in, they stay, because that was just a moment in time. And how do we make sure that Americans do not take that one moment where they may have to take money out or not opt in, continue to burden them for the next 10, 15, 20 years of loss compounding? And so I do think that there's this opportunity in terms of public policy around accountability. I also think as employers, and this is why I'm so excited about this panel, is that we can do more. We can look and ask ourselves some basic questions. We can say, do we have an auto enrollment plan? We know just over about 57% of employers have it. But we know the stats are just undeniable. If we do it, you get to a 90% participation rate. So do we have it? If not, we can do that. Do we have auto escalation? Because you can only start with a little bit because you're trying to save a little bit more. You're trying to put a little money, to help your children. But every year it could go up 1%. And again, you could take it down, but we're going to take you right back up so that you can get on a path. How do we make sure that every worker can start contributing $1? The way I think about it, the very first check that we ever made, if we go back, that Friday, whatever we made was zero compared to that Monday when we started our new job. And so if we maxed out $1, we wouldn't miss it because that's our new baseline. That is the ease. And then finally, I do think on the individual side, it requires us to get creative. Again, when I think about Otis Brown, those great pamphlets are beautiful and we love it, but it is not reaching the person whose life is lifing. And so how do we not stand behind our beautiful materials, all these wonderful tools, and how do we then start measuring who's not engaged and why not? Do we have it in language? Do we have it snackable? Do we give it to our manager of 10 as part of their weekly staff meeting to talk about these benefits in a snackable way? Do we consistently remind them, in addition to doing our part, that they have a role to play? And so I think collectively, each of us doing just a little bit more can go a long way in changing the outcomes of millions of Americans.
Penny, anything to add there?
Just one thing real quickly. When was the last time you talked to your parents or your kids about money?
All the time.
Our research shows that the generation with parents above them and kids below them are really stressed right now because they're not having that conversation. And so they're concerned about whether their parents are going to run out of money and might become dependent. They're concerned about health care prices and what they may be faced with in terms of long-term care. And then those same folks are worried about whether they're a bad parent or grandparent if they put money in their retirement plan rather than their kids or their grandkids' college plan. And so what I'm describing is just the very real anxieties that 3 generations are feeling right now. And our research says they're not talking about it. 49% of families in America actually will be passing on something, some form of wealth to the next 2 generations. Only 1/3 of those people plan to talk their families about it. And it's causing a lot of stress. It's a very emotional thing, right? I recognize that. But this is where great financial advice comes in. This is where a financial advisor who can sit down and say, listen, you don't have to tell your kids how much money you have, but it's really important to talk about how you developed that wealth, what you were thinking about as you were saving and scraping and investing and doing what Otis Brown did years ago. It's so important to have that conversation because you're passing on legacy and values as much as you are passing on the money. And then when you start talking about business owners, only 60% of business owners say they're going to talk about the transfer of their business with their family. It takes years to set up the transition of a business, a family farm, a multi-generational idea. This is something, again, that our industry needs to be much more helpful with, but families really need to lean into this conversation.
That's right.
Just a gentle reminder that we are taking questions through the app. There is a QR code, so please send in your questions. We have a few already. I'm going to ask all of you, would it make sense to have a mandatory defined contribution pension as one tool to deal with this retirement crisis?
Well, the good news is we're partnering together to provide, as you mentioned earlier, pension-like solutions without the balance sheet burden. And so one example, we just recently announced a partnership with Empower Retirement, where we are able to provide what we're calling TIAA Secure Income Account, or SIA, which is our guaranteed lifetime in-plan solution to their DC plans. And when you think about what that provides, it's additive to a well-designed plan. It's providing principal protection, it's providing guaranteed growth, and it's providing an opportunity for that individual to have a paycheck that they will not outlive. And we hint on this, and we talked a little bit about longevity risk. And so I think with all the solutions that we're all coming up with, which will take all of us, making sure wealth advisors have access to all the tools to provide and address the hopes and dreams of everyday Americans, I am optimistic that we do need to have guaranteed income as an in-plan solution, the closest thing to a defined benefit plan, without the burden of being on the balance sheet and without adding additional cost. And so the momentum is here. Good policy was at the heart of it. In partnership, I think is absolutely the key for all of us to work together to do more. And so that's how I would think about that.
It was one of the areas that actually our leaders in Congress came together on.
Exactly right.
And did agree, and didn't catch a lot of attention in the media, but that was the second time they came. So retirement is actually a bridge builder, you know?
We wrote about it.
Yeah, and retirement is a bridge builder among our lawmakers. I mean, I could envision the Secure Act 3.0 of having automatic income.
Yeah.
You know, when you're starting your job, you're already defaulted into a program that's going to provide that for you in the future. So there's a lot there, but I do think we owe it to our legislators to at least give them the recognition that they're on the right topic, the right people are talking, and they're coming up with some great solutions from emergency savings all the way through, you know, to just make it easier and more accessible for small businesses to offer retirement.
Yeah. And the outcomes to getting it right are big. We've talked about today, nearly 100 million workers don't have a plan. So if we can all agree on access is a big deal, you get 100 million new savers, our savings rate as a country starts to tick up.
That's right.
That savings rate is going into our capital markets.
Exactly.
It is making our capital markets deeper and more abundant. It is our capital markets drives our economy that differentiates us from the world. And it's that savings rate that helps the policymakers deal with the cost of entitlement programs. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here as a populace discussing the expansion of entitlement programs to fill this gap. So, you know, it's called a crisis, I think, and we've talked about so many different issues, but if you really step back, we can solve this. Both parties want to solve it. We need to solve it for everybody, not just for a few, and the benefit to the country, to the strength of our country and our economy and capital markets are clear.
Another question on the great wealth transfer. We've talked a lot about how millions of Americans do not have enough savings to sustain their lifestyle in retirement, yet there is another phenomenon underway taking place over the next 2 decades when it's estimated that baby boomers and the silent generation will pass down a combined $84.4 trillion in assets to younger generations. What do you see, Penny, as the policies and practices needed to optimize this unprecedented level of wealth transfer?
Yeah, well, optimize to what end? And what we're seeing happening with the next 2 generations of investors is a different point of view about what money is for and what it can do in the world, in a family's life, as well as in terms of impact investing, in terms of philanthropy and the way that that younger generations want to engage with their money, how it's built, and what it's used for. So this is another place that I think it's ripe for innovation around how to innovate for social impact using wealth that has been built across the generations. Frankly, I see this happening among very high net worth cohorts where they and their families are making decisions together about how they want to pass on and give away their wealth. And young people, and we know this from our own associates at our own organization, young people are considering what they work for and how the company that they work for is engaged in making a broader societal impact. And so using tools like donor-advised funds, really leaning into philanthropy perhaps differently in terms of its social impact, I think is another place that financial advice is going to be called on, not just about how to build the wealth and what the return is, the stock market return on that wealth is, but what the societal return is on wealth that's been built up. And we're talking to our clients about this every day. We found in some research just a few years ago, and it still holds, our clients want to talk to us about 4 things: health, family, purpose, like what does it all mean anyway, and then their finances, and turn that entire value set and life plan into a financial plan that makes sense of it all.
I'm going to give the last word to you, Thasunda.
Okay.
Your thoughts on wealth transfer.
Well, one, it's been great having this discussion, and the way that I would end is saying that, yes, there's a lot of money in motion. How do we make sure that it's meeting the needs for more Americans? How do we make sure that we're also not just focused about the 84 trillion, but building that next generation of wealth that our society will desperately need? When I think about what we've talked about, though, I think there's 3 words that come to mind. Ease has to be there. Momentum is here through partnership. Public, private, individuals all working together to ensure that that 84 trillion is well optimized to what those individuals really are seeking. And I love your 4 ways in which it's on their mind, but also making sure that we continue to do our part as leaders in keeping this topic top of mind, knowing that if we're not talking about retirement, we will transfer generational debt. And so it is important that we engage young people so that they understand how to get started earlier. And for those that may not have started, without judgment, like Otis Brown, doing our part to say it's never too late to get going. And so I'm excited about the opportunity that we all have. I'm excited about the momentum, even with Washington, on a bipartisan way. And I'm excited that young people and all adults are talking more and more about something that we can collectively make a more positive impact for everyday Americans, and one that could ultimately lift overall society.
On that note, thank you very much to the guests who are on the talk.
Thank you, Jennifer.